Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest from San Diego, California, Dr. Karen Kramer, aka Dr. Karen. Dr. Karen is an intuitive healer, grief recovery and resilience navigator, and Wellness Retreat Center CEO who has transformed the lives of hundreds of thousands of individuals around the globe since the early 1900s. With a profound understanding of the human mind, her true passion as a mindset facilitator, speaker, and author lies in helping navigate heart-wrenching losses, griefs, and traumatic events. Dr. Karen draws her inspiration for her best-selling book, Healthy Grief, from personal experiences and powerful client results. With a wealth of international coaching experience, a profound understanding of techniques that unlock the subconscious mind, and her intuitive abilities, Dr. Karen is dedicated to helping others live happy, healthy, and full lives so we can create a better world for everyone. Dr. Karen, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on the program today.
Oh, Dave, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. So thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. And we have to give a shout out to Kate Mallison, who introduced us through, as she was the coordinator for the Grief Awareness and Education Conference. This was back in September of last year. You were one of the presenters. We went to each other's workshops, got to know each other a little more, had a follow-up conversation, and voila, here we are today doing a podcast episode together.
And I will say, Dave, I've been known as one of the happiest grief experts that are out there. I put experts in quotes because who's ever an expert? But I think you are like up there with me is how can we make this heavy topic something that we can relate to people with a smile on our face. And I really gravitated to you for that as well.
Well, thank you. And yeah, and I think really we can talk about a difficult topic in a way that's not all doom and gloom, that's accessible. And I think we can do that with a positive attitude. Because I tell my students, all of us are gonna be dancing in another dimension at some point. We live in a death avoidance society, so let's create an atmosphere where we can talk about a taboo topic in a way that's accessible and in a way that's going to make you more confident dealing with children, families, and individuals who are dealing with grief.
Yes. And that's one of my focus. And even the subtitle to my main book is how to normalize and navigate loss in a culture of toxic positivity. So I'm right there with you. We have it even written into our Declaration of Independence here in the United States, pursuit of happiness. And anything that's not happy is something that is broken, wrong, needs to be fixed. Therefore, avoid grief. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, me too. And between you and me, Dr. Karen, I don't hang around with totally happy people. I hang around with individuals who are capable of expressing the full spectrum of their emotions in a very genuine way. Because you can't have grief without love. You can't have joy without sadness. It wasn't meant to be either the yin or the yang. It was meant to be the yin and the yang.
And speaking of the yin and the yang, is we appreciate the other because we have the opposite. We wouldn't appreciate sun as much if we didn't have nights. So yes, that yin and yang is a perfect example, Dave, to really appreciate the full spectrum of life.
And I think that's one of the reasons I think that we kind of gravitated to each other, because I think we align with the same philosophy. You know, in terms of embracing all that's part of the human experience, including the emotions that aren't necessarily happy ones.
I used to say this even to my children before I really got into this grief work, is we learn a lot more about ourselves when things don't go as planned.
Yep.
We
Yeah.
truly do, right? So even after my kids would, and I have 5, blended family. So if it is they got a poor grade on a test. So what's coming up for you? And in a gentle way, not like you should have studied more. It's like, what's coming up for you? What did you learn as part of this process? Or they ended a relationship. Okay. What did you learn about yourself or that relationship, that other person? What did you learn about that that's going to help you as you step into the next relationship or a friendship estrangement, whatever it was? So you're going to learn a lot more about yourself being being whatever it is in your life when things don't go as planned. Because if everything was smooth and hunky dories, it's not our time to really look inside for ourselves and say, what's going on inside of me that is
Yes.
leading me to respond to this external event?
Well, when you frame it like that too, it teaches individuals to look at mistakes not as things to be avoided, but mistakes as opportunities for improvement.
Definitely.
And this way we can model that everything is in service to us and we can learn from the not so good things as well as the good things.
Yeah. I've been in leadership development and executive coaching for over 30 years. So a lot of conscious coaching. And the last 8 years is diving down deep into more the subconscious and unconscious
Yep.
work through methodologies like NLP, neuro linguistics programming, quantum healing, hypnosis, and other things. So as I was helping clients and understanding myself, diving down deeper into our psychology, our subconscious and unconscious mind, I'm finding those past traumas, triggers, and limiting beliefs start to bubble to the surface,
Mhm.
right? When things aren't going as planned. We're learning a lot more about our own makeup, our own psychology through the process. It's a process of just exploring through life.
Yeah, and being able to bring the subconscious and unconscious into conscious awareness helps us understand the narratives that have either been transmitted generationally or the narratives that we have bought into based on our own experiences in this lifetime that have contributed to us staying stuck. And if we can become aware of that, we can modify or change those beliefs around it so we're engaging in a productive way with others and we're looking at ourselves from a very healthy lens. It makes all the difference in the world because I think the beliefs, those limiting beliefs, lead to limiting behaviors or behaviors that lead to either self sabotage or behaviors that lead to not reaching our highest potential. So,
They definitely do, Dave. And one of the stories, so in Healthy Grief, there are 30 grief survivor case studies that I have in there. And they're with my clients as well as some others that are part of this. But I started with my own stories. And to the point you just mentioned about limiting beliefs, I'll share briefly one of those. So I was born to my parents late in their life. So they were 45 and 47 when I was born. And it wasn't until I was in 5th grade that my teacher in kindergarten, excuse me, not 5th grade, I was 5. So I was in kindergarten and my teacher looked at my parents at that open house parents' night and said, "Oh, are those your grandparents?" Well, somewhere in my little 5-year-old brain, I said, "Grandparents are old. Old people die. Die means you're not there anymore. My parents are not going to be there anymore." I just made this very poor, immature belief around death and dying associated with my parents. So move ahead in life. And there were various times, like when I was 20, my dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So I just had this, what somebody might be perceived as irrational response to that. And I couldn't consciously tell you what it was at the time, but I didn't know how to be around him. I didn't know how to respond. So my father actually passed away in 2012 at the age of 90. And in those last 6 months leading up to his life and soon after, it was harder for me to be relational with my dad and it was easier for me to be logical. So when I got into this body of work, and it was after my dad passed away, I realized I had gone back to that little 5-year-old girl that had made that very poor, immature belief and acted out of that. I made decisions out of that,
Hmm.
that around my parents and their age and passing. So when I released that, Dave, so we're actually at the time of this recording sitting in January of 2026. So here in January of 2022, again, this was 10 years past my father's passing. I'd done a lot of the deeper work that I also do with my clients, and I've released that little 5-year-old, okay, released that belief. So on January 5th of 2022, my oldest brother passed away. The following day, my mom, all of 97 and a half years young, almost 100, she looked me in the eyes the day after my oldest brother passed and said to me, I wasn't planning on living this long. I'm curious what it's like to pass over. Now, mind you, if that little 5-year-old that had that old program was going, I would have acted so much different than I did in that moment. But because I had done the work, I was able to be present with my mom and say, okay, mom, what do you need from me? And in 2 weeks, she had passed. So in January, 4 years ago, brother and mother back to back. And then a month later, my remaining brother was diagnosed with dementia. One of the stories that I have in Healthy Grief is called Death, Dying, and Dementia, which was around a 6-week period of time where I felt I had lost 3 main family members. So
Hmm.
all that to say, to the point, Dave, is that we unearthed this belief I had created as a 5-year-old that actually I then had limiting decisions or limiting beliefs that were playing out until I was able to identify what that is. A perfect example of how grief unearthed some of those beliefs for me.
Well, and obviously with your mom too, for me, as I was listening to you share your relationship with her during her end of life chapter, that it became more relational because you became essentially a guide for her to transition her into to eternal life. And
Yes.
so that's when it becomes relational. It becomes an extension of the spiritual experiences that we have on earth.
Very much so. And also talking about spiritual relationships. So I'm a product of an engineer dad and a clairvoyant psychic mother. So I think also being able to step more into my intuitive gifts and connect with that. And it really is. I had, even at this point in time, I had a week ago, a dear friend of mine who I actually was there with her during the last few days of her mom's end of life, and being present in that moment and recognizing that there it is such a sweet process. Yes, there's grief associated with it. So put that aside in a box for just a moment. It is so special in that process when we can be present with somebody during that process and connect with them and be relational and understand them and truly be in that moment with them. I've had the honor of doing that with my father, and I just told you about that story. My mom, my 36-year-old niece, my brother here or there, and now 2 of my dear friends with their parents in that process. And truly, it is a special transition time.
Hmm. Yeah, if we look at our end of life chapter is another chapter to our life on earth. That's the most spiritually profound chapter we experience if we allow ourselves to, and particularly if we're open to entertaining different beliefs that are going to help us prepare for that transition, exploring, existential matters like an afterlife. How will I go on? Will I continue to go on? Do I want to do a life review, make amends to those individuals who I believe I've hurt? So when we can be present in a relational sense for that, it now becomes a meaningful chapter that prepares them for their ascension in their next life and contributes to the spiritual growth that they're going to engage in their new existence.
And you are speaking my language, Dave. You're speaking my language. So a lot of the work that I do with my clients in the field of hypnotherapy is actually when we are going to what is the past trauma trigger and limiting belief. Many of those are actually sitting in another lifetime. And even I'm talking about the little 5-year-old girl. I shared with you that story. Why is it that me at 5 years old would make that decision and actually sat in another lifetime to bring that forward? And all is to say, it actually touches upon the next book I'm working on right now, which is Healthy Spirits, the gateway to awakening. So it really is looking at how we are stepping into this grief. And when we are, what's been coming to me a lot over the last 2 weeks, so sharing this, and Dave, you just beautifully stepped into this, is when we are experiencing some form of grief, and usually again due to the passing of a loved one, but there's anything that can put us into challenging our sense of identity and dropping us into this deep emotion. So a divorce, a diagnosis, a car accident, becoming an empty nester, a career change, a move. So there are all these various different kinds of things that also we have a similar process, but we don't necessarily see that as grief. So part of this is acknowledging that we have gone through this grief process before, so we can recognize it for ourselves. Then when we're going through this significant emotion, it drops us out of our logical 3D, all of like, I have to do this and I have to go to work and I have to go to the grocery store and da 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 da. And it drops us into this state where people tend to say it's almost like the world stands still, right? Because we've stepped away from that conscious everyday life and we're just fully present in the moment.
Yeah.
Whether we're fully present in our grief or we're fully present with somebody or we're just in the moment. When we drop into that deep emotional state, we're actually dropping into another part of our soul field, which actually taps into our natural intuition, which for any of us can show up in so many different ways. So I've even had, as I was sitting there with my friend a week ago, as her mother was passing, she was starting to sense certain things. And this is where the book is around letting people recognize if you are starting to see things, hear things, know things, experiencing things, you're not going crazy. Like when my mom went through this process in 1940, giving birth at 8 months along to a stillbirth, who was my sister at that time. She didn't know in the 1940s if she's going psychic or psycho. And this is part of this grief that you may be dropping into something and or at what I call a threshold. Really tapping into your own natural intuition versus stepping away for something that's scary and back into the conscious everyday,
Mm.
to-do list and everything. So you're speaking my language at a different level.
Well, yeah, and it's like, the common saying that goes around about the human experience is we're not human beings living a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings living a human experience.
Yeah.
And if we can look at it from that mindset, it allows us to tap into our natural intuitive ability. And all of us have the ability to tap into intuition. All of us have the ability to access a higher level of consciousness, whether it's through meditation, whether it's through a regular practice of yoga. Reiki has been known to stimulate higher consciousness experiences. All we need to do is be open to the fact that we can transcend limitations beyond the human experience.
Yes, yes, and yes. And what I found with my clients is they typically come to me because of some form of grief. And in
Yes.
doing the hypnotic work, not only are they releasing those past traumas, triggers, limiting beliefs, but they are opening up to, oh, I am tapping into my intuition is the easiest way. There's another term for it that I call just your higher self. But yes, I've had a client who, within 15 minutes of doing the work, a sister that she hadn't heard from in 8 years and had a falling out with, ended up just calling her randomly. In other words, when we change our soul field, like forgiveness and things like that, we're positively impacting other people. This quantum entanglement, this butterfly effect, however you want to phrase it, truly is amazing, miraculous, and accessible to any of us.
I think when we focus on and on making a conscious effort to embrace different philosophies, whether they be spiritual, religious, that are going to help us not transcend trauma, but also help us re-engage with meaning in a world that's going to be totally different after loss. That's the key. I was telling a friend of mine, it's like if you take a basic example of a foundation of a house, the materials that you used to build a foundation 10 years ago aren't going to be the same materials you're going to use to rebuild it. Those materials that you used 10 years prior aren't going to cut it as far as rebuilding the foundation 10 years into the future, because materials are going to be different. And it's like rebuilding the foundation of our lives after grief. The materials that made up our priorities, made up our values, going to be much different post-trauma than they were before. So we just have to realize that things change. If that is the case, then our beliefs and priorities need to be examined.
Yes, I love that analogy, Dave, around the rebuilding of a house. And there's an image that came to mind. So my parents built their house in the 1950s. Well, it finished 1950, literally at the 1950 cement block house. So I lived, and we didn't have any heat or AC. So I lived in an igloo during the winter and an oven during the summer. That was my childhood. And when I think it was 20, so again, the house was built in 1950. In 2007, my parents had a house fire. So luckily enough, because it was cement block, it contained the fire. But what happened is my mom's like, great, I can redo the kitchen, because there was at 2008 was much different need at that point in time than my mom in the 1950s, right? So it just gave a perfect opportunity to rearrange, using your analogy, but even with that structure, rearrange after that grief, which, by the way, having a house fire is a form of grief. Not how that impacted my parents too, but you get to rearrange what's inside of your psychology. You get to rearrange your beliefs, let go of those things that don't serve you,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, I love that
Absolutely.
analogy.
Yeah. Well, I got a good friend of mine who's a builder, so we talk about foundation work and equating our journey through grief and through the other side of grief as rebuilding the foundation of our values and of our priorities to reflect our new reality.
Yeah. And that whole thing, I'm not going to get it correctly, but you talked about to reflect our new realities. There is a phrase that is, a mind once expanded can't go back to the same shape again. Do you know the quote I'm referring to?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've heard of the quote, it may be referred to in kind of different connotations or different contexts, but yeah, something to that effect.
Yeah. So this new reality is once expanded, it is very difficult for us, and we can't go back to that old thinking. Now, there are some beliefs, again, stored at a certain level of subconscious, unconscious. It's not like we can just overwrite them with a vision board and one affirmation, but yeah, it is giving us a different perspective in life.
Well, and for me, since my own perspective have expanded, particularly in the 22 plus years since my daughter Janine's transition, I look at it back now, and I wouldn't want to go back to where I was prior to that, because that would mean that there was no growth. If there was another event that could have triggered that same expansion other than the transition of my daughter, I would have welcomed it. But the bottom line is, this is the experience I was meant to have in this lifetime, whether I liked it or not. And it wasn't the human experience, it was my soul had to have this experience for the ultimate evolution of my soul. Now, whether you look at it from a past life perspective, okay, whether it's being a parent who's experienced the death of a child, whether that was some type of resolution I needed to do for maybe from a past lifetime where perhaps, let's say my mother was the one that had lost me and she was the bereaved parent. So now from that, maybe I had to learn from that experience based on whatever soul contract my mother and I came up with that may have manifested hundreds of years later. So, It's just like some days I looked up at the sky, Dr. Karen, and said, what the hell is my soul thinking? But then again, these were the challenges that my soul came in to experience in the human form for the greater evolution of my soul.
When touching upon it again, because you have personal experience with this, the loss of a child, it is one of the hardest griefs because it defies the logic, right? The logic is I, as the parent, pass before my child. When there's so much that's wrapped into that. I was working with a client last year, and it had been coming into October. For her, it was October. And last October was the 6th year that her daughter, 19 at the time, just before her 19th birthday, took her life. Death by suicide, another hard form of it, right? What did I do wrong? Everything that goes into that psychology. When for her, she was like, I can't, how did I bring this into my life? How could this be part of my soul contract? And granted, you and I are talking that language. Obviously, I didn't with her, but there was some conversation that led into that. Like, how can I brought this into me? For what lesson? For what purpose are we having this experience in our life? And of course, that's a very hard one to deal with when you're dealing with it and you're raw in that grief. Here is what happened last year. So I've been working with her for 2 years because I work in the field of hypnotherapy. We were actually able to tap into the energy of her daughter, which I've never done before, especially with somebody who has passed in such a way. But I was tapping into her energy and again, being intuitive myself. And it was so sweet. So her daughter's energy was so sweet. It wasn't like the things we think about with somebody who has taken her life by suicide, a very sweet, very old soul. And so we created a process to connect with that energy. And that was about a month or two before this October of last year. It gave the mother, my client, such peace in that way, such a beautiful exchange. And the daughter said, I was not meant to live long. That was part of my contract. I was to come in and only live to a certain point, and I'm continuing with my life purpose, but on the other side.
Yeah.
And that knowledge and that information, I'm getting chills now, she said when she came into October, this last October, she had such a different perspective, more joyful, more open, more energetic perspective.
Yeah. I tell my students, we have a section in our class where we talk about do we survive death, and these are all the spiritual aspects, Dr. Karen, of death. Whether it's Brian Weiss's work with, past lives and past life regression therapy, whether it's Ian Stevenson's and Jim Tucker's research on reincarnation with children, Raymond Moody's work with shared death experiences, Bruce Grayson and Raymond Moody with near-death experiences. We get into all of this, and the question I pose to my students is you need to ask yourself, is death an illusion? Do we actually really die? Or do we continue to go on in some type of form? And if reincarnation is valid, in fact, do we truly die? The soul has free will. What I learned through Weiss's work, the soul can stay in total spirit energy or total source energy for the rest of its existence, or it could say, okay, let's meet with my spiritual advisors and let's contract the next family I'm going to be a part of, the challenges of this lifetime I'm going to accrue, what nationality I'm going to be, what culture I'm going to be, what ethnicity I'm going to be, and also how long am I going to do this in the human experience. When I began to understand about 3 years or 7 years past my daughter's transition, due to the wise guidance and spiritually transformative experience that Reverend Patty Farino facilitated for me, that helped me find peace with my daughter's transition and believe in the survival of consciousness. All the information about Weiss's book, which I had read 3 years into my grief, had so much more meaning 7 years after the fact, or 4 years after the fact, because everything that Patty and I had discussed in Long Island and everything that occurred, look, all the tumblers started falling into place. I said, yeah, now I get it, that the contract with my daughter was supposed to be a short one, and that she was supposed to show me that love does exist on the other side. And in human law, 18 years wasn't nearly enough time for me to enjoy her gifts. But in sacred law, 18 years was a sufficient enough time. But it took me a while to make that distinction. And that helped me towards acceptance. Okay. And acceptance doesn't mean closure, it just means I've accepted the fact that this is the way my life is going to be for now and moving forward. And I'm going to make every effort to re-engage in life with purpose and with meaning and to leave a lasting legacy. Knowing that my daughter's physical presence is never going to be, but her ongoing spiritual presence and her presence in spirit form energy is always going to be a part of what I do.
Yes, Gabe. Yes, yes, yes. And I wish more people understood that process. And it's less about understanding and it's more about embodying it too.
Yes.
Had the blessing of being raised with that clairvoyant mother who the concept of reincarnation and we're just a soul that transitions without our meat suit type idea was always there, right? So even though when my father's passing, it was my old beliefs that were kicking up around that process, I was more able to engage with the concept. Like I knew my dad was just transitioning. My brother transitioned out of his meat suit, right? My mom did that. My niece did that. So they're just transitioning, but they're all around and connecting in. My mom would be 102 this year if she was still alive, 102 this year. And she is actually more able body in her spirit energy and actually doing a lot more guiding and directing of me. She's part of my spirit team. I'm doing a lot of the work that I'm doing now was actually carrying forward a lot of the work she did starting in her early 20s. And it's just exciting to see how I'm expanding it. But yes, this understanding and embodying the concept that the souls do live past their physical being.
Yeah, when we embody, we integrate our grief and we take the best parts of our loved one, those ones that we move forward with them in our own lives. And we become kind of like a package deal. We have with our ancestors in spirit who's the best parts of them embody the best parts of us, and we move forward and make a difference in people's lives.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Which is what you're doing, Dave, with your work, right? And I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty certain that we would not be here impacting the people we are had we not had these experiences.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, the experiences we have, good or bad, shaped who we are and what we do. Everything that I've done in the past, every decision I've made career-wise has led to what I'm doing in the present. So you have that past-present connection. And I believe, yeah, you live in the moment, but you also realize how you got to the moment. You got to the moment because of the past decisions that you made. Some that maybe didn't turn out as you hoped, others that did, but it all played a role in what we're doing today.
Definitely.
So,
Definitely. Yeah. I love it.
yeah, me too.
Yeah. Yeah. And you say you're going to go into another topic?
Let's just run with this. Go ahead.
Well, mine was actually a slightly different topic too, but related to grief because I was thinking as we were talking about this, what really was some of the major decisions that I made as I am sharing with information out. For example, healthy grief. I didn't just say, hey, I had this experience around grief and I want to share it. I kind of did, but I also knew that I just didn't want to share for me, I didn't want to share another book about grief. But it was actually 3 years ago. In a 3-month period of time, I had 3 clients that had some similarities, aside from the fact that they were coming to me to release various different forms of grief. And each of them had some physical manifestations of the grief. I had one who had ovarian cysts. It was significant divorce that she went through, like significant emotions after this divorce, a very nasty divorce, and actually diagnosed depressed by the time she came to me. I had another one who was coming out of the ER with kidney stones, and another one who had just been diagnosed with stage 2 colon cancer. So all three of them had health related issues. The very first one, and again, I live in this body of work where I begin with my mother, recognizing that our body responds to the energy around us, right?
Mhm.
So the first client I had, when she said she had ovarian cysts just before we did more of the deep hypnotic work to do the release, what popped out of my mouth immediately was cysts or pockets of unresolved sadness. Now, two parts to that. It doesn't mean that all cysts are sadness, but I had just read, so Louise Hay's You Can Heal Your Life. I just remember that that's one of the phrases that she said. Cysts can be pockets of unresolved sadness. I just kind of mentioned that we do the hypnotic work, which is basically releasing that a lot of the sadness, okay, that
Mhm.
came up. So I did a follow-up with her, and honestly, I can't remember whether it was a 1 week or 1 month, but I do both follow-ups with my clients, and she had mentioned that one of her cysts was so inflamed that she actually had to go in for surgery. So when I did my follow-up with her, she said 3 times, me and my doctor were so surprised that the cyst was no longer there. Now, cysts are known to recede. So I stopped her and I said, tell me more about the surprise. So I'm actually not clear whether she did surgery or whether it's ultrasound or whatever it was. But basically, her cyst not only receded, but it completely healed over. You couldn't even tell that there was a cyst that was originally there. The second client who had just come back from the ER with kidney stones, when we did the release, it was lumps of unresolved anger, which again, that's part of Louise Hay's lumps of unresolved anger.
Mhm.
So we did 45-minute work about releasing anger. And two things happened after that. Her sister, that she had now in the process of it, she didn't tell me anything about what she was releasing in regards to anger. But apparently she had a sister that 8 years they hadn't talked, and that sister happened to text her within 15 minutes. And then she passed a kidney stone within 4 hours after that. The third one, again, diagnosed with stage 2 colon cancer, it was her doctor who told her that she was just diagnosed, but she was just 2 months shy of the 5-year anniversary of carrying around the guilt of not being able to save her husband who took his life due to suicide. And so, in the process of that, she was 2 or 3 weeks away from surgery. And that cancer, I can't say it completely went away, but it reduced itself in such a way that I can say here 3 years later, she has not done surgery and she has not done chemo. She's actually managed it just through healthy lifestyle, but it was reduced. And so, healthy grief was specifically designed first by me recognizing unprocessed grief will settle in the body. So, how
Mhm.
can we do it healthily? How could we process through this thing called grief in such a way that we're not avoiding it? We can have those conversations. We can connect it to anything because it's more than just death and dying in a way that we can process it healthfully and so it won't settle in the body.
Well, that what you've discussed in healthy grief reminds me, it's kind of like a nice segue into Dan Condren's work with permanent healing. Have you heard of permanent healing?
No, I have not.
It is a book that was written several years ago. And Dan Condren was a physician. He talked about quantum healing, but he also has this glossary in his book that has every potential, Dr. Karen, ailment known to humankind, from skin issues to kidney issues, and he talks about what he calls a diseased thought that contributes to the ailment. And he also talks about the significance of that ailment, probably from a quantum mechanics piece and what that signifies may be going on in our lives. And he also talks about here's the thought that you need to replace the disease thought with that's going to help you achieve health. So I mean, it doesn't eliminate the need for Western medicine, but boy, it's a nice integrative piece that goes along with it. And there have been instances, I know Louise Hayes, for a fact, she healed her own cancer through just intense meditation. She rejected traditional Western interventions with chemotherapy and radiation, told her doctor, I'm going to do meditation, focus on, channeling the inner life from my body to the sites of my cancer, and she was in total remission 6 months later just through pure meditation. Now, not everybody has that opportunity to do that type of advanced state, but it has been known that certainly intrusive and self-defeating thoughts, if they aren't released, can lead to physical problems. And there are other individuals who come in with a higher evolved sense of consciousness and ability where they can heal themselves through meditation, through channeling that inner light, which we're all born with, towards
Yeah.
healing.
Yes. Yeah. And I know that Joe Dispenza has a similar story about healing. I have found, and again, I come from the background with my mother, who was clairvoyant psychic and a hands-on healer. I remember 35 years ago coming home and actually hearing it from the woman who was coming to my mom's home to thank my mom. So I got to hear it directly from her. My mom worked with a woman who was 3 days away from having tumors, uterine, a large tumor. And again, 35 years ago, and my mom, when she was doing more of a hands-on healing, this image came to mind that was a repressed memory. When this woman was 7 years old, she was playing with her then 5-year-old sister, and in play pushed her, but she fell off this cliff or something or other and died. So when this image came forward along with the emotions, energetically, my mom was able to assist in healing. And I say it that way because my mom wasn't the healer. She assisted. It's around working within the energy fields that are blocking us. And to a point you just mentioned earlier, Dave, our body does have the ability to heal itself.
Yep.
It's just, when are we blocking? Not consciously, but at an unconscious level, blocking our natural ability to heal ourselves.
Yeah. And, that reminds me of a quote from my favorite book on The Afterlife of Billy Fingers, where he says, society teaches limitation, not potential. And we have the potential to do great things with our mind and use our mind to access all types of multidimensional levels of awareness if we believe that. And I believe also are supported in that quest as well, too.
Definitely.
So,
Definitely. And there is even a video that is floating around. You may have seen this, where the video is about 2.5 minutes long. It is showing an ultrasound monitor. It's showing the abdomen of a woman who is on operating table and 3 doctors over her sending energy. I think they're singing or something, chanting, sending energy into, I believe it's a bladder, and I believe it's bladder cancer. 2.5 minutes, and it shows the ultrasound as this tumor or cancer just starts to, it almost looks like a cell, and go away. 2.5 minutes. And here in 2020, my personal belief in 2020, one of the things that came through COVID is we started to second guess and challenge what we used to believe in our traditional systems, whether it's political, healthcare, et cetera. So let's just talk about health. Do I believe in this or not? What are other alternative ways of healing? And that's where those of us who are in this field of various different ways of a holistic health and healing have been more known and more accepted, and more people have tried them out than traditional take a pill, surgery, etc.
And I think integrative health is the wave of the present. It's going to be the wave of the future. I think what Western medicine can't address, holistic practices can, and in combination, it improves the individual's quality of life. It improves their physical health and also improves their mental health outcomes. And the research, Dr. Karen, and I know you know this, bears this out.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
So I want to shift gears with you for a minute, if I may.
Yes.
I want to talk about the Villa Vision Wellness and Retreat Center. I know that is your creation. What is the mission? What inspired you to create the retreat center? Tell us about the services you provide and who's likely to access those services.
Yes. Well, it was 6.5 years ago. I think it was in October 2019. During a visualization meditation, I actually had a vision of a villa, literally 2-story vision of a villa on my land, where at the time I saw myself working with more women. Of course, I work with both genders now and all ages, but at the time it was more for women. And I saw myself working with various different holistic health practitioners. So back to what we were just talking about, and being able to help them heal on various different levels with various different things. That was a very clear as day vision that I had. So that's hence the reason why it is called the Villa Vision, because it was the vision of a villa. Okay. So I opened it up in August of 2022. And at that time, I don't have the building built yet, but it is coming. That is on my land. And with my mom's passing, it's going to expand onto it's butting up against my mom's land. So there's just a dry riverbed, or with our rains, we actually had some
Nice.
water butting up. So it's now going to become close to 5 acres of various different things that are there. So through my home, I basically open it up through my home. I'm a divorcee, empty nester. So my home has become the Villa Vision Wellness and Retreat Center. So I do work with a woman who has been over 3 years working out of my house. So she does Reiki as well as an esthetician. She is also a channeler. So we actually do work together. For example, when I was mentioning the woman with the daughter who had passed, she's the one who helped me assist in channeling the daughter. Here at the Villa Vision, my business is a home my home is a business, but really it's from retreats to day events to what I call solo retreats. So when I'm doing one-on-one deep work with clients, especially those that are out of state or out of country, they may come here for a whole weekend of 2 or 3 days to do more of the hypnotherapy work. My colleague Abby and I do more hypnotic, deep, we call it quantum journeys with individuals as a group. So that's the Villa Vision Wellness and Retreat Center, the vision and how it started, and still expanding right now the work that we're doing, which is more spiritual, more quantum healing work.
That sounds fascinating. Um, and I really think again, not to discount the impact of a good evidence-based therapist, but I think sometimes, Dr. Karen, I think the greatest and most profound insight we can get in the shortest amount of time comes from the spiritual practices that we're exposed to, whether it's hypnotherapy, whether it's shamanic journeying, the revelations we can get from those practices and the information provided. And again, provided that the client is ready to hear that information, or if that information isn't going to change the outcome, you may choose to say, maybe this is not the time to do that. Whatever information you share from that, and I can say this from experience working with a shamanistic holistic practitioner, the information they've shared with me has been more insight provoking than 5 or 6 years of traditional evidence-based or talk-oriented therapy. Those holistic practices by themselves or in conjunction with evidence-based therapy are powerful.
Yes. And I've actually worked with a number of traditional talk therapists and even medical professionals who are recognizing that their profession, they can only take it so far, and they've been able to tie in some of these methodologies. So it does bring forward that deeper level. And to the point you just mentioned is, if I'm sitting with a traditional talk therapist, I'm only sharing from my conscious perspective. And so the beauty of being able to connect with somebody who is more intuitive, who actually can sense, see, hear, see, feel beyond the words that are being said, and also walk an individual. And hypnotherapy, there's different levels of it. So mine follows along more
Yeah.
the quantum healing hypnosis technique, the Dolores Cannon, similar to the Brian Weiss that you're talking about. So bringing forward that deeper level of that subconscious, unconscious, even higher self that knows everything about us is so powerful. So many awarenesses and learnings can
Yep.
come through that process.
Absolutely. And we could maybe get information about other lifetimes that we've experienced, that having that knowledge can help us resolve any conflicts or resolve any challenges that we're dealing with in this lifetime.
In many cases, they do go back to past lifetimes, in my experience.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, particularly
Mm.
with the other practices you've exposed them to, that's going to open that up. Because
Mhm.
and especially if they're receptive to it, that's going to open up a higher level of consciousness and awareness, and the awareness that we've lived other existences in other lifetimes. So,
Which may be, and in some cases, non-earthly. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
We go deep.
yeah, absolutely. We haven't talked about the possibility of extraterrestrials, but there's been some talk that I think right now, what I've been hearing and reading is that we may be assisted by some extraterrestrials down the road to help the world get back to more inclusive and more loving and a more peaceful place.
Yes, that's consistent with my experience and exposure, and also, which is also out there when it comes into talking about extraterrestrials. If you Google it, you will find Congress, the government, is being more open
Yep.
now in the last 2 years about their 7 decades of experience in working with extraterrestrials. So we're coming to a different age, Dave.
Yeah, I think so. And that might be Dr. Karen, another podcast.
I think that is. We
Yeah.
started with grief and look where we've gone.
Yeah, we've gone to ET. So
Yes.
anyway, I would be remiss as a podcast host and would probably have to take a course on intuitive observation. In the background, I know you've got your Healthy Grief book, but I also know you got your Healthy Grief bundle with Moving Forward. So I would be remiss if I did not ask you about your Healthy Grief bundle, what it's about, and how it aligns with Healthy Grief.
Yes. So thank you, Dave. So right now it is the Healthy Grief Bundles. 3 years ago, I gave you the stories around how it really started. Healthy Grief, the book itself, it's actually a textbook now. I can literally say that now. It is a textbook used with funeral professionals to help train them. It also includes not only the 5-stage healthy grief framework, which is a basic framework. I'm not intending it to be complicated, but it just literally gives a framework of how do you think, how do you feel, what action steps can you take, what support do you need, and what does the future look like, even if it's just within the next 10 minutes. So it is a basic framework where even therapists have taken it and
Yep.
applied it because you can tie it into anything. And then a majority of that book is the 30 grief survivor case studies that are in there, all different aspects of grief. So people gravitate to know that they're not alone and there are people who have processed through grief. Then from there, since it is a 400-page textbook, if you get the actual hard copy of it, that's not something you typically give to somebody who's raw in grief. That one I'm finding more like people are gravitating to the stories, doctors, therapists, funeral professionals are actually buying that book. But moving forward, which is the guidebook, is the second book, was created because people were saying, I want something to give people who are raw in grief, to lift them with it. So this literally is 111 pages. It's kind of hard to see with the light, but it is pictures. That's a wheel of life, for example, in there, open pages. I bring in some stories. By the way, this is Stephanie. I shared her story about carrying around her guilt and overcoming stage 2 colon cancer. But there are 5 stories that are in here. So it's a really easy to use, colorful, open, reflective. And then last year, I also published the Splash of Hope and Inspiration Oracle cards, which I say are a dash of hope or a splash of hope and inspiration for any time in your life. It doesn't matter grief or not. And they're just colorful and reflective. And it basically takes the concepts in these books into easy concepts on the back, where for short little concepts activity steps and journal reflections that are in there, which, by the way, the journal navigator will come with this as well. So this is all part of a healthy grief bundle so far.
The thing that struck me is not only the brevity of the book and I've seen the Healthy Grief book. I saw that up close and personal when we met in Connecticut, and that's a voluminous edition. I mean, you've got everything in there from nuts to bolts, but 111 pages, 111, those numbers resonated with me. The universal sign of spiritual awakening, or 1111, where 111 is all about beginnings. And if you add the ones together, you get three, which is a very sacred, mystical number as well. So I was looking at all of that. That's where my head was immediately going, beyond the content.
Yeah. So there's a lot of spiritual connection that's in there. And that actually, when the Moving Forward book ended at 111 pages, I said, I'm done. It's, spiritual numbers I will pay attention to. That's where the book needs to end.
One of the things is it's going to seem like we're going to go on a different path, but I want to ask you this one question because this was curious to me. I know you've done work with corporations in several countries, in addition to the United States. How do the cultural norms and rituals of each of those countries inform the coaching strategies that you use?
I've actually trained in leadership programs in Singapore. I've trained in Spain and out of our Brussels office as well. The company I worked for previously, almost 30 years, is called the Center for Creative Leadership. And a benefit for me, Dave, is the fact that I never assume. So when I went into those cultures, Japan was the other,
Yes.
Delta Airlines, Japan. So when going into those cultures, and also in Canada, which it has its own, has something different as well, is I say, here's the framework. And actually, I even do this, even when I'm talking about my spiritual beliefs, I say, here's the concept I understand at this point in time, or my belief. You tell me how this fits into your own culture or your own belief system. And when I do that, I'm getting chills on this now. When I do that, like I distinctly remember in Singapore, because it was actually a mixture of various different Asian cultures that were there, 4 or 5 that were actually part of our program. And they gravitated. They were so excited to come in and teach me how to eat this certain dish in such a way, how the feedback model would and would not work in the context, their recommendations on how to change it. So when we come from a place of curiosity, you'll learn so much more because they're teachers.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. And that's something I impress upon my students. If they're working with somebody from a different culture, establish yourself as a learner. Don't assume that you know anything. Let them teach you. And if you present a belief to them or present a concept to them, how does that align with your cultural norms? If it doesn't align, okay, what is it that we need, where we need to go that's going to help you understand what we're trying to do in the context of what you've been raised with culturally? So I think that's a great approach, is not to assume and simply ask.
Yes. Approaching with curiosity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I always tell my students, stay curious. Don't ever lose that sense of curiosity. You ever lose that sense of wonder about what's going on in the universe. And just, there doesn't need to be a scientific explanation for everything, because there's some things that we know are real that don't have a science-based explanation.
Yes. And I love that, because curiosity was my word too. I was the head coach for an organization for 3.5 years, helping to train NLP, specifically neuro-linguistics programming and hypnotherapy. And my biggest thing is I said, stay open, be curious. Because when we are focusing on, even in hypnotherapy, rather than thinking of like, what's the right answer? Or as a teacher, like, what's the right answer? When we stay more present and open with those who are around us, we can ask more questions to elicit the information, rather than thinking that we, as the practitioner or the teacher, have to tell them anything. Because when we're really in co-creation with whoever we are with, whether it's a neighbor, a child, a parent, students, clients, There's so much more that we can create together, co-creation and curiosity.
Absolutely. The two C's.
Yes.
The two Dr.
Mhm.
Karen, you've left us with a lot of good stuff tonight, but I'm going to ask you one more question in a way to kind of go towards wrapping up our conversation tonight. If you're going to leave our listeners with one ultimate takeaway, what would that be?
Well, I'm going to stick with the first one that came to me. I'm going to come back to the topic that we had in the first. We're talking about grief. And I would say grief is a gateway. Grief is a gateway to understanding more about ourselves, other people, and this thing called life. When we come from it from that perspective of curiosity, this heaviness is seen from such a different perspective. So grief is a gateway to understanding.
I like that. Simple but yet profound.
Yes.
Now, my last question for you, we're going to give you a chance to promote yourself a little bit, Dr. Karen. If people want to get in touch with you, purchase your books, what's the best way for them to do that?
The easiest way is to go to my website, drkarenkramer.com. So you can look at my name as I have it here without the dot, drkarenkraner.com. And on that page, if you do want to book a 20-minute call with me, up in the right-hand corner, you can quickly go to the book a call. And then you will see when you go to that page, a big ribbon that says, hey, want to know more about the Healthy Grief Bundle? Click on that, it'll go to my books.
I like it, especially for individuals who are in the early stages of grief. Their concentration tends to be compromised, so the more simple we can make the process for them to access your needed resources and other coaches' needed resources, the better off we are. So, Dr. Karen, thank you so much for just a great conversation. I really enjoyed it immensely, and maybe we can do this again sometime.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. Let's get down into those spiritual and ET conversations. I got a lot more on that one day.
Yeah, I think that could be a whole other, that could be a series.
It could be a series. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Karen. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.